Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, a podcast that brings a special guest out of the multiverse and straight to you. And now your host, David Ginsburg.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Tales from the Fandom. Today, I am joined by a guest who I have had the pleasure of following on Twitter for a very long time. I've enjoyed what they are putting out there into the world, and if you know this name, you may have heard her name on Francita Soto's episode earlier this year, but I have Olivia Hill joining me today on the podcast. How are you today, Olivia?
Hello, I am wonderful. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm so glad that we finally got connected and are here to sit down and record this. I'm very much looking forward to talking with you. And like I told you at the beginning before we started recording, I'm really excited to talk to you about the product that you're putting out in the world right now with iHunt.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really glad. I'm very excited that you are excited.
Now, you've got a couple fandoms that we're going to talk about, and then we'll definitely be talking about iHunt. The first one is a fandom that I fell in love with. I was introduced to it by a friend of mine, and I fell down that deep well of love for this show. And it's a TV show called Leverage.
Yes, Leverage. It's one of my favorites, if not maybe my favorite. Like what a perfect example of how to write a TV show, right?
Exactly. How did you first get into the show?
So it was the weirdest thing. I was actually so Margaret Weis Productions, the RPG company, they were looking for people to fill a couple of spots in a couple of their licensed games, and one of which was Leverage. And sometimes, whenever you're a freelance writer and you're looking to work on a licensed property, you haven't consumed that thing. So I very quickly mainlined the entire series. That way, whenever I could send my query letter, I could be like, oh, hey, this show, I know it, I like it. But it was unlike pretty much every other experience I've had with that kind of thing. I watched Leverage and I fell in love with it instantly. And I've been an enormous fan ever since. I did a lot of writing for the Leverage RPG, but even if I hadn't, had I stumbled upon it, it's like my favorite thing. I love it.
I have to say, the Leverage RPG has been on my wish list of books ever since I knew that it existed, and it's one of those books of, I don't know if it'll ever come down in price, but maybe I'll find it somewhere.
It's a really brilliant game. I'm super impressed with it because usually when you play an RPG or it's like a licensed RPG, usually what it is, it's just like some rules and some stuff about the license, and like you can of course emulate whatever you want with whatever game. But I feel like Leverage is like the prime example of how to take the language of gameplay and use it to perfectly emulate a genre. Like the Leverage RPG is just not only this wonderful heist game, this wonderful like composite crew game, but it perfectly speaks to what makes Leverage a good TV show. And it's unprecedented in RPGs. I love it so much.
What was it about the show that brought you in, that hooked you?
So there's a few big things about it, and the first, it's such a little weird thing to me because it doesn't sound like me. I'm into a lot of like very sort of sarcastic, irreverent, like dark stuff. Typically, I like a lot of like horror and supernatural stuff, that sort of thing. But Leverage is just uncompromisingly optimistic. Usually, I don't really like that because it's oftentimes like sort of childish in a way or sort of naive. But I feel like the way that Leverage is optimistic is like it's very punk rock. Because you have these characters who are criminals, who are, bad guys, and they're taking down the really bad guys, and you never have to worry about like, is one of these characters going to get shot and killed? Like, do you have to worry about these characters hitting rock bottom and watching them break down in tears? No, you're watching them kick the bad guys' ass, and it's awesome. It's so fun. It's wonderfully escapist, but it's not little kitty. it's family friendly, but it's very aware of what it is, and it's very bold and very aggressive about its optimism, and I love that.
It was definitely a show when I started watching it. I really didn't know what to expect. I had seen the advertisements when it was on like
Mhm.
TNT or TBS, whichever station was broadcasting it at the time, and it never like I really think the advertising didn't really do it justice,
Mhm.
and you really need that person, or in your case like the role playing aspect, the writing of having somebody really be like, hey, you need to watch this. And I feel like that is how a lot of people got into the show, is just somebody else discovered it and said, you need to look at this. Because for what it was almost like a gem, like an undiscovered gem. Like here it is sitting on cable TV when it could have clearly been on any of the major networks.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I agree because I do remember the advertising and all of the commercials and things, and when I saw them, it was like it didn't seem like a particularly interesting show. It seemed like another, it seemed like another like cookie cutter sort of like A Team knockoff, that sort of thing. But having been directed to it in a weird sort of one-off way, I can absolutely respect that. It's a lot of everyone I know who loves the show heard about it through word of mouth or through the RPG or something like that. Um, and I do feel like if it was more earnestly presented as what it was, it may have been a massive, massive hit. I know, of course, it went on for what, 6 years, something. I don't know, but it's it's unique. It's very smart the way that it's written. It does the procedural, like the standard sort of cop or mystery procedural, but it does it in a different way. It's sort of, well, I mean, of course, it's a heist show, but it's a heist show meets a procedural. So instead of having characters solving the crime, you're having characters do the crime, and then at the end you get to hear it explained. So it's, I don't know, it's a gem. It's so good. I cannot love it enough.
Now, Leverage has a group of 5 main characters for the most part, and there's a lot of great side characters that come in and out of the show. Who do you have? Who is your favorite? Who do you love the most?
Oh God. Okay, so I have a weak answer that sucks, and then I have a sort of a cynical answer that also kind of sucks. So I don't think that I have a favorite in the show. I would say that if anything, I have a least favorite, which is also kind of convenient. Timothy Hutton's character, the sort of the main character of the show.
Hmm.
I think that he is definitely the weakest link. I know that he brings the show together, and as far as the show, the marketing and what have you, Timothy Hutton really brought the star power. He was the thing that they leaned on in a lot of the advertisement. But I feel like the show really sung when the other characters were isolated, when it was Parker and Hardison, when it was Sophie and Elliot. Nate was a good character, don't get me wrong, but he was sort of the weakest link for me. I love everyone else so much, and they all grew so much. So that's the first weak answer. The second weak answer is that I really love Elliot, um, but not because I necessarily think he's the best character or anything. I love him, love Christian Kane's portrayal of him. But the reason I say that is because when I was working on the RPG, there was a chapter of the Leverage Player's Guide. It was called Hackers, Hitters, Thieves. I was writing the hitter chapter, the Elliot chapter. Um, and I wrote a whole bit, like the whole chapter is narrated from a character that was inspired by Elliot. She was the hitter. And that was some of my favorite writing. It was probably my favorite writing I had done at the time, and it was heavily inspired by Elliot. Um, and ultimately, that ended up informing the big thing that I do now, which is iHunt, the book that I wrote. The voice in iHunt is extremely inspired by that chapter that I wrote in the Leverage Player's Guide, which was inspired by Elliot. It's that attitude, that sort of that cocky assertiveness, that like I don't know. So I love Elliot. I love the way he's written. I love his depth and subtlety.
That is really fascinating as far as especially with Elliot and the influence that the character had on the character that you wrote and informing on the character that you have in the iHunt series, which is really neat.
Mhm.
It's definitely something where, and I have to agree, because my favorite, like whenever, like I always lean to Hardison because
Mhm.
geek at heart. I see a lot of the stuff in him of when I was younger.
Mhm.
Like I would really be like side by side with our thoughts and just actions. But I love that like almost the kids of the group with Elliot and Parker and Hardison, just all three of them together. It just made for such a fascinating dynamic between the three of them.
They very quickly became a family in a way that I'm not used to seeing in TV. Which, like, you always have sort of one of the big tropes that happens in good TV is, the family you choose, not the family you're born with. But I feel like in Leverage, it it happened very quickly, but also very organically. A lot of times in TV, it feels forced, or it feels the opposite, which is where the characters are sort of kept at each other's throats for far too long. The characters
Hmm.
in Leverage, Elliot, Parker, and Hardison specifically, they are at first, suspicious of each other, but very quickly they grow to love each other and foster each other and sort of help raise each other. Um, the good example with that, I think, is Parker, who of course is like she was probably the most juvenile, or at least the most naive at the beginning of the show, but very quickly, even like 3 or 4 episodes in, you see her building maturity in the other characters just by virtue of her interactions, and it's so powerful. It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
It is absolutely one of the things, and uh, just to drop this in case people are listening and they don't know, is I actually got to record episodes with Christian Kane and then Dean Devlin earlier this year for the show
Oh,
that came out earlier for Almost Paradise. And one of the things that I dug about when I was talking with Christian Kane and I did not know is that he did all of his own stunts in
yeah.
Leverage.
Yeah, he did. He actually, I don't know if this came up in your discussion, but I read a while ago in an interview with him that, or gosh, was it? I don't know. I can't remember. He was talking about how in Angel he was very frustrated that he didn't get to do more of his own stunts. So it's a good opportunity and leverage.
Yeah, he said since I believe it's since Angel, he does his own stunts for every show. Everything
Yeah.
that he does is him 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. And as someone who, dabble in the TV industry a little bit, like it's very fascinating to me. But I understand why like studios don't allow actors to do that. But when they do, it's always so much more genuine. Like all of my favorite action bits lately have been when actors are able to do their own stunts. I recently I watched what was it, Birds of Prey with Margot Robbie, and she does a lot of her own stunts. Not all of them, but she does a lot of her own stunts in the fight scenes, and it feels so much better. Like it's next level shit. Whenever you have the actor, you can see their face in the same shot, and they don't have to like dive off stage subtly and stuff like that.
Hmm.
I love it. So yeah, Christian Kane is brilliant. I love him in the Librarians. I'm really excited to see him in the new Leverage.
I was going to ask if you had heard that they're bringing Leverage back minus
Minus
Timothy Hutton.
yeah, for obvious reasons. Yeah, no, I'm really really excited about that. And also it's really interesting because they got the lead from the Librarians to
Yep.
come in to basically take Nate's place. I would have liked to see the show without it at all, but I think that he's a great addition. And I think he can bounce off the other characters and help them bounce off each other. So I think it's going to be brilliant. I can't wait.
I do know that from the news that had come out, I know that Noah Wiley has a year contract, and I believe Aldous Hodge has it's not a full appearance schedule because he's got another show that he's doing, either a show or a movie at the same time. But that could all be up in the air with everything that's been put on hold at this point. But
Oh yeah. And Aldous Hodge was in the NWA movie, the sort of the documentary drama thing that they were doing. And he was brilliant. He was so good. He should have won all the awards.
yeah, it's amazing just to see the people, the cast pop up. It's one of those things where I was into Leverage once I found out that Christian Kane was in it because I like to follow different actors from
Yeah.
shows that I like. So I'd bounce from show to show, and it's very funny to see Aldous Hodge pop up in different like movies. I'm like, I know that guy, I know him.
Absolutely, absolutely.
One of another fandom aside from Leverage, which I find very fascinating. It's a fandom that's been around for an extremely long amount of time. It's got fans all over the world. I lived in Japan for 2 years, and I never really got into it or understood it. And I'm hoping that you can help me because it's just out there and it's pervasive and it's pop culture, and I just don't know anything. And that's Gundam.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I'm a weirdly enormous Gundam fan. I have a Gundam tattoo. My wife and I both have matching Gundam tattoos, actually. It's a thing that I've been into for forever. So I lived in Japan for about 7 years. The way I got into Gundam was sort of weird and backwards. I was very young, and I was growing up in Southern California. I lived in a heavily Asian and heavily like Hispanic neighborhood, and I wasn't really exposed to the same things that most of my peers, I guess, that I grew or not grew up around, but most of the people that I talk to now, like most of the nerdy types, I sort of had different exposure than they did. I didn't grow up with like Star Wars and all of that. I grew up with, anime that was, poorly dubbed as a child on, like the Spanish speaking networks and things like that. So it was a very different experience, I guess, growing up. And I loved Gundam growing up. Gundam heavily informed my, sort of world perspective. It was really mind blowing for me because all of the things that my parents tried to get me into, all of the things that the normal kids would be into, as they would put it, like GI Joe and oh gosh, I can't even remember, like Ninja Turtles, that sort of thing, and all of those things that my parents kept throwing into my face and telling me, oh, do this thing, look at this toy, whatever. They all really presented violence as the logical conclusion to conflict, and it was always something to be celebrated because the good guys fought and the good guys won because that's what good guys do. But in Gundam, there were not really good guys. There were oftentimes bad guys, but even the characters who were fighting to save themselves and their people, the fighting was never presented as good. It was always a regrettable thing, and oftentimes the good guys would find out that they were being used, and it helped me build a very heavy skepticism from early on of things like government and militarism and things like that. So Gundam was hugely influential to me growing up. And then in high school, I took Japanese in high school for a couple of years, and my teacher was wonderful, wonderful person. She was basically a surrogate parent for a lot of the time because my parents were not the greatest, and oftentimes I wouldn't go home after school, and so she would help me out. She would sometimes take care of me, and that kept me more interested in Japanese media. I'm not like a huge anime nerd or anything like that, but I really love Gundam and I really love a couple of things like that. Um, and so that stuck with me really heavily. And then, of course, for the last 7 years, I've lived in Japan with my children, my wife. It's been a wonderful experience, and a lot of the sort of grounding point for me there was that Gundam is Japanese, and there's a huge sort of cultural celebration of what Gundam is. I got to be there for the 30th and 40th anniversaries of the show. It was a huge deal to me. It was a very big thing. So that's me and Gundam.
If somebody like me, like I know nothing about Gundam besides like obviously shows and movies
Mm-hmm.
and the people that do the models, which again you see models of every shape and sort and big and small.
Mm-hmm.
Where would I get started? What would be a good place for me to start with exploring that fandom and getting into it?
Okay, so there's a few answers to that question, and I'm going to give you the answer that I would probably expect to hear from the average Westerner, but I don't agree with it. So that one is watch Gundam Wing. Gundam Wing was a very big series in the 1990s. It was on, I think, Cartoon Network. I don't know. But it was very popular in the West because it was the first real exposure that a lot of Westerners had to Gundam. I think that honestly, as far as Gundam is concerned, it is the bottom of the pile. It is the worst entry point, and yeah, as far as I'm concerned, Gundam Wing is a lot of the reason why Gundam didn't pick up more in the United States. It was never really that massive here. Like it was popular. It was just sort of a cult show in the U.S. And a lot of people that you talk to still these days, if they're like, "Oh, I'm into Gundam. I watched Gundam Wing in the '90s, whatever." That's a pretty common story. But I think that Gundam Wing is not a very good example of what Gundam is. And so a lot of people watched Gundam Wing, liked it, and then tried to go on to some of the other Gundam shows, and they realized, well, this isn't really what I was expecting to get into, and they just sort of peter off in their interest. Um, the secondary answer, which is the hugely nerdy answer, is you should just jump in the original series. The weird thing about Gundam is that there's an original series that has been going on for 40 years with movies, a lot of different TV series over the years, and a lot of like original video animations, that sort of thing. And it's still going on. It's still going strong. It's still a wonderful, wonderful series. But a lot of what people know of as Gundam, like Gundam Wing, G Gundam, that sort of thing, those are not actually in any way related to the original series. They're completely different universes, completely different styles of story, completely different expectations going in. So you can jump in with the original series. Like you can go back to the 1978, 1979 series, um, Mobile Suit Gundam, and you can watch it, and it actually holds up really well. I recently rewatched it, and I was surprised at how well a show from the late 70s is oftentimes more relevant than modern war dramas. A lot of people call Gundam the Star Wars of Japan, but I really, really don't agree with that. I feel like it's more of a Star Trek of Japan. It's or even more of a MASH of Japan because it's not a sci-fi fantasy story. It's social science fiction. It's political science fiction. It's very exploratory and very down on what you would consider normally like an action adventure show. So you can jump in there. You can absolutely do that. But then you're watching a TV show from the 70s. You're watching a second TV show from the 80s, a third TV show from the 80s, two movies from the 80s, a movie from the 90s, a couple of movies from the 2000s. It's a huge investment. It's a really, really, really big time investment. The third thing that I would say, the thing that I would really, really recommend is instead of doing that, go with the more modern series, Mobile Suit Gundam Iron Blooded Orphans, or G Teketsu, which is what it's called in Japan. It's a show that is not related to the original series. It's completely standalone, and that's a good thing. It's a great starting point because it is a war story about young children who were forced into essentially slavery at a young age. They're child laborers who start a workers' revolt and ultimately overthrow a international spacefaring corporation. It's a beautiful, powerful, dark, and just amazing story. If you watch the whole thing and you're not in tears at least twice, you are an android. It's amazing. It's powerful. So I love it so much, and it's the best place to start Gundam. If you start Gundam, you watch Iron Blooded Orphans, and you don't fall in love with it, you probably won't like the rest of Gundam.
Okay. I can see I love answers like that where I could start at the beginning, but then there is all of that. And as someone who constantly looks at Netflix and say a show like Supernatural that's been on for 15 years, and I'm like, I don't know if I really want to start this show.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could handle 40 years of shows and movies, but a good entry point like with the series that you said definitely sounds something that I can handle.
Yeah, yeah. It's to me, it is, despite not being the Gundam that people grew up with 40 years ago, I think that it is easily the most iconic example of what Gundam should be.
Now, Where would I find this Gundam? Where, like, do you happen to know? If not, I mean, I'm happy to Google and find
Yeah,
one.
absolutely, absolutely. I'm fairly certain that you can actually find it on YouTube right now on the channel Gundam Info, which is it's literally just Gundam Info, one word, and that's Bandai's official channel. It is free to watch if it's on there. I'm pretty sure it is. They cycle their shows occasionally, but it's been on there for a while. And it's 2 seasons, 25 episodes each. So it's a 50 episode series from start to finish. When the show is over, the show is over. It is a perfect arc.
That is one thing that I like about certain Japanese series is
Mhm.
that akin almost to like some of the European TV series that you see is that they do their show, they
Mhm.
say what they want to say, and then they're done, and then they move on to something else.
Yeah, it's a lot like British TV in that way. Like you can do 6 episodes or you can do 20 episodes or whatever, and you can be done with it. Things don't have to keep going just because they make a profit, and I think that that's much better for storytelling.
Absolutely. What as far as Gundam goes, I like that you had mentioned that it's more a Star Trek or a MASH, and I love how you describe the show because I've heard that it's very political and that it's very much a last resort thing. And again, it's one of those things that I would rather see than a show that's okay. Let's resolve everything by fighting because I think
Mhm.
at this point I've seen enough of that to
Yeah.
where I don't need that. I would rather see like the dynamics of let's get to a resolution or let's get to a problem solving thing rather than it always being a fight.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's in the original series, like I said, it holds up pretty well. There's one episode where I think that it really exemplifies what I'm talking about. Um, so the original series is about basically two opposing factions, the Earth Federation and the Principality of Zeon. If you've seen Gundam toys, uh, just iconic Gundam imagery around. The Earth Federation is the titular Gundam. It's the sort of white, blue, red, yellow, very sort of hero looking stuff. And the Principality of Zeon are greens and reds. They have very stark imagery. And if you talk to a lot of Western fans of Gundam, they refer to the Principality of Zeon as space Nazis. And that to me, I think, is a stark misunderstanding that is it's very iconic of the difference between Japanese media and American media, because there are some moments that are suggestive of that. There's, for example, one big speech that happens in the series where a character is literally he's saying Sieg Zeon" in the sort of the Nazi salute sort of way, and it's supposed to be rousing and it's supposed to be very like harsh and evocative and scary. Um, but there's this episode where one of the Xeon mobile suit pilots crash lands on what looks like a desert island, and he accidentally, I guess, takes out the father of a small family, and it's like a crash. It's an accident. It's not intentional, but he's stranded there. The heroes, the Earth Federation, find out that there is this Xeon trooper on this island, and they're going to sort of intercept this whole thing. And but the episode is centered on this Xeon soldier fostering this family that he's hurt and sort of taking them in and protecting them and helping them. And he basically it's about his humanity. And we don't really see that with things that we call Nazis in Western media and American media, because Nazis are the things that we're supposed to just shoot. Um,
Hmm.
and it when I watched that as a child, it was just so powerful to me, because it's an essential reminder that there's always people on the other side, and even the people that we acknowledge are evil and do evil things are still capable of things that we consider humane. Um, there's a degree of nuance there that I just don't see in American cartoons and American media in general, for the most part. It was hugely influential to me, and I think that is just this enormous example of why Gundam is beautiful.
That's really cool, and I'm definitely going to have to put it on my list of shows to watch because it's 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 a fandom out there, and there's a few of them that
Hmm.
have existed for 30 years, 40 years, where they just keep going and going and going, and it's in pop culture. It is in, like, I remember living in Osaka and going down to Denden Town and seeing the huge Gundam, like, on the side of a building, or
Hmm.
going into stores and just the store was just completely Gundam. And you hear about it here back in the States of people getting the Gundam models or getting into watching the show or getting the video games.
Yeah.
And it's definitely something where I want to inform myself better, and hearing about the show as far as like what it is and what it is not, because I totally had some different misrepresentations about the show before now.
Mm.
Of, I just thought it was, I thought it was more like, okay, each group has like big giant robots and they're basically fighting with each other all
Mhm.
the time.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's definitely not just that. And I mean, a lot of the show goes on without that. A lot of the show, you know, you have some really great episodes that don't even involve the robots. Gosh, yeah. When I moved to Japan, at first, so in Odaiba, which is an island right off of Tokyo, there's this giant full size Gundam. It's a perfect 1:1 scale Gundam. Um, and the first time I saw it was like, oh, God, I hate to sound this, but it was like almost like a religious experience, not in the I'm a big Gundam nerd way, but like in
Hmm.
the look at this thing that we built. Like this thing that's been around for 35, now 40 years. Like it's got such a cultural touchstone that we have this piece of enormity like in front of us, this massive, 20-meter tall, just beautiful thing. But also it was sort of a weird experience for me because in the TV show in Mobile Suit Gundam, the titular Mobile Suit Gundam, the big white thing, the Principality of Zeon and a lot of the people of that land call it the White Devil, um, because it's a fucking machine of war. And like looking at it from its feet, from just a few feet away, looking up at that thing, it's terrifying. It's majestic in like the most literal sense. Like you look up at that thing in awe. And and we built that. Like the fact that it is such a cultural icon created this giant fucking statue. And it's just, I don't know, there's nothing else in the world like it.
Out of curiosity, because again, I know that there's video games on Gundam. Are there any role playing games that have Gundam, or is that not a thing?
Yeah, role playing games in the analog sense or the digital sense?
In the book sense, like tabletop role playing
Yeah, there
games.
is one. It's not any good. It's not any good. We did one a while ago that was a fate-based game that sort of has that sort of feel to it, I think. But the actual Gundam RPG, it exists. It's very popular in Japan. I don't know that it ever got translated. Maybe it did. I don't know. But it's in Japanese, and it's not any good. It's very sort of clunky, very slow, very boring. I would not recommend it to my enemies, basically. So no, I think that that's definitely an untapped thing. A lot of RPG gamers have sensibilities that are very contrary to what I think that would make a good Gundam game. So I think that that would be best done with a more modern, very emotion heavy thing because it's a drama. It's a soap opera in space.
Hmm.
It's not about rolling to see what part you hit and determining how much armor you take off.
Right. It's not anything like a BattleTech or a
Yeah.
like even a Macross or a Robotech type
No,
thing.
it's, if anything, it's kind of like the polar opposite of what BattleTech is.
Hmm.
Like the robots are there to add scope and scale. They're weapons, but they're weapons that so okay, this is a weird one, but the reason why Gundam exists, there's this in the Gundam universe, at least in the original series, there's these things called Minovsky particles, which are these weird particles that were discovered sometime in the future, and when they are dispersed, they destroy long range communications, and they basically prevent the usage of nuclear weaponry. And the reason for this, the sort of design argument that Yoshiyuki Tomino gave, was he wanted the battles to be face to face in such a way that the people who were being killed are, you can see them. You interact with them and you have to engage with them personally, because he felt that the way that most war anime at the time was presented, it was all at a distance. It was all these missiles and lasers and rockets, where it was all very depersonalized. And he wanted to show the horrors of war. And you can't see the horrors of war unless you can see the faces. So that's why that exists.
That is it. It's really fascinating to hear about this show. And when we get done recording, I'm gonna have to go to YouTube and bookmark the thing for tomorrow, because I work from home,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the things that I get to do, because I do work from home, is I can listen and watch at the same time, like to shows or to streamers, and so I tend to burn through shows that way, and it's definitely going to be on my list of things to check out.
Absolutely. Well, I can't wait to hear what you think about it.
I will have to let you know once I get through it, and if I cry less than 2 times, I will know that I am a monster.
Yes, be very, very careful. Check yourself in, get some help.
Now, one of the things that you mentioned at the beginning of the episode today, talking about Leverage, is that you had written some tabletop role playing stuff for Leverage, and that is one of the things that I found out about you, is that you have been in the tabletop role playing industry for a number of years.
Yeah.
So I guess my first question is, how did you get into tabletop role playing, and like what was your entry point? How did you get hooked on it?
So I got playing when I was a teenager. I started playing Vampire the Masquerade when I was a teenager. And basically, it was because I was surrounded with all of these people who were playing games like Dungeons and Dragons and, like, I guess Magic the Gathering. I kind of got into a little bit, but I never really got into that stuff because it was all very technical. And it was all very geeky in a way. Like I don't mean that to sound negative, but it's all very about like number crunching and like, doing math and like winning. Whereas Vampire the Masquerade was not about winning; it was about being cool. Like it was about it was about exploring emotion and sort of exploring the implications of your actions and discussing consequence and um, exploring rhetoric and religion and metaphysics and things like that. It was the little bit of maturity for me that separated it from other games, and I fell in love with it. So that's how I got into gaming, is through Vampire the Masquerade.
That's awesome. I got into gaming, like my mom used to have one of those little mall kiosks.
Oh, sure.
And so I'd go on the weekends, but I'm sure, and I annoyed the crap out of the Walden books or the B. Dalton people by sitting on the floor and reading through like Dungeons and Dragons books. So those and the West End game Star Wars were my first purchases.
Mm-hmm.
Played D&D, played Star Wars, but I fell in love when I got invited back in college to my first vampire game, and I fell in love hard with the White Wolf storytelling, White Wolf game, like
Yeah.
vampire, werewolf, mage, like those out of anything are my fondest tabletop role playing experiences, is playing characters where I may do X, Y, and Z, but dang if there aren't going to be consequences for anything that I do further down the road.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's that next step. It's the consequences and gravity that really appealed to me. Absolutely. That's also kind of how I got involved in it professionally, I guess, too. Because when I was a little older, I was with my wife. We had been together for a little while, and she started working with some of the White Wolf games. She did a couple of small freelance gigs for Mage the Ascension, I think. I can't remember which one she started with. But then we started, talking to a lot of the people that got involved. And there was just a random time that, who was it? Chuck Wendig He was one of the developers. He was developing a book for Werewolf the Forsaken. This has been a million years ago. Oh my God. Chuck was developing a book for Werewolf the Forsaken, and basically one of his writers fell off the face of the earth, and he needed someone. And so my wife was like, "Oh, you should check out this, person that I am with right now." And Chuck was like, "Okay, send over some samples." And I sent over some samples, and Chuck was like, "Oh, great, work with me." And I started working with him, and basically that's how I got my start. I jumped all over the place. I worked with White Wolf, with Catalyst Game Labs on Shadowrun. I work with Margaret Weiss on Leverage, and on Marvel Heroic. I work on a lot of things. Green Ronin. I worked on Dragon Age. I can't even remember. I've got about, I don't know, about 3 million words in print. So that's quite a few as far as those things are concerned. Yeah.
What game, out of curiosity, and if it's not an answer that you can, or not a question that you can answer, I totally understand. But is there a game that you look back on and you're like, dang, like this is my favorite game, or this was my favorite gaming experience?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. As far as game goes, because gaming experiences are completely different things. Um, as far as games go, my favorite game is Blowback, which is a game by Elizabeth Sampit, and it is a game that is playing on the tropes of the television show Burn Notice. Um, and it is brilliant. It's my favorite game probably that I not like that I didn't do because I try to do that myself. But Blowback is a wonderful game. It emulates those tropes so well. It brings a whole bunch of new ideas to the sort of the conversation method of RPGs. It models stories in a way that I'd never seen at the time, and it heavily influenced my work from then on out. But I don't get to play it very often. It's a very cult game. Not
Hmm.
many people have heard of it, and usually it's very hard to get people to play something that's like 15 years old, but nobody has ever played. So that one's a hard one. But as far as experiences go, I would say that oh man, probably my favorite experience was with Apocalypse World. I ran a really good Apocalypse World game with some people at Gen Con. My wife was there. My friend Travis Stout was there. There was a lot of really great, really talented people, and I think that a lot of times good role playing game experiences come from the sort of pedigree of the people that you're with. And
Hmm.
the synergy together. You can have some amazing role players that are hanging out together, and then their egos butt, and it doesn't work. But that game was just amazing because like everyone was just feeding off of each other in ways that I'd never seen in a game. And it was so memorable. It's the kind of thing that like if I weren't already at a convention, I would immediately go to a convention and brag about. It was a wonderful time.
Now, for you being in the industry, the tabletop role playing game industry, um, you are also creating a game based on iHunt, which I talked about at the beginning, and we've briefly touched on it back and forth. But what is iHunt, and what like I guess I'll start with what is iHunt.
Okay, so what iHunt is a novel that I wrote. It was my second novel, my second full novel that I'd released. My first novel was called Blood Flow, and it was a vampire novel. And in a lot of ways, it was sort of like it was my saying goodbye to writing in the tabletop role playing game industry. It was me addressing a lot of the things that I had grown to sort of resent about vampire fiction and about sort of dark supernatural and like traumatic fiction over the years. It was me working out some stuff. In this vampire novel, I liked it, but it wasn't the best thing I'd ever done, but it was very cathartic. But then I was teaching English in Japan. I was teaching, and I was also doing some freelance writing, editing, layout design, that sort of thing. I was busting my ass, and I I really wanted to look at the human side of that world, um, and what that would mean. I was always a big fan of games like Hunter the Vigil, and like Hunter the Reckoning, where you're playing a person and you're sort of facing a world that is bigger, stronger, and scarier than you.
Hmm.
But I didn't. I always felt that those things were sort of weak. because they were so unrealistic. It's very easy to say, well, the dragon is very big, so the dragon is scary. Of course, the dragon is big, but the dragon isn't real. We can make up all of the bullshit that we want to say something is scary. And it's not ever as scary as the things that we really face. So I have this idea for this book called iHunt, which is about this young woman who hunts vampires and other monsters through an app like Uber, basically. And the premise of this story is that it's an economic horror story. Yes, there are vampires, there are werewolves, there are demons, and they're scary, sure. But to me, eviction is scarier than any vampire. So that 3-day notice is scarier than Dracula. Getting your electric turned off is scarier than the Wolfman. And so this character, Lana, in iHunt, is putting her life on the line and not making very much money. She is barely scraping by. And if she didn't put her life on the line, she wouldn't have a home. And to me, this is super personal. It's a thing that I think a lot of people grip with in the gig economy these days. Like, people are busting their ass for too little money, and that's iHunt. It's working class heroes risking their lives for not enough thanks.
That is definitely something. I mean, you touch on it like you just said about the gig economy. I look at it and I see like I follow a number of people on Twitter that are doing the gig economy where they might have a full-time job, but the full-time job doesn't cover everything they need to do.
Yep.
So I have friends that they start their day at 8 and they're not going to bed until 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, because they're doing freelance work. They're doing part-time other work. They're doing like these side projects where they're getting paid, but the work that they're doing far outweighs the money that they are making from it.
Absolutely. And I'm like, of course, this is getting to be a bigger thing now. Like, every day it gets to be a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. I've done work on Fiverr. The thing that really gets to me is, like, so I get back to America. I was living in Japan, and I get back to America, and one of the first things I had to do was buy a car. Right? Like, you need a car to live in California.
Of course, yep.
Yeah. So the first thing that I'm doing is I'm looking for a car. I don't have a lot of money. I basically moved with a few $1,000s, like a little war chest that I was going to use to get adjusted, to pay those down payments, and to get situated while I was looking for work. And so I look for a car. And what is the first thing that I look for in a car? Well, I need at least a 2006 car, because Uber requires a 2006 or newer car in order to drive for, whoever needs to get to work that day. I knew that I would need to do things like Uber or Lyft or whatever in order to make ends meet. So when I'm trying to buy a car, I'm not even thinking about me. I'm thinking about, how can I turn this into a paycheck? And then I get situated. I get an apartment. I'm getting readjusted in life and stuff. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm busting my ass. I've got a little bit of spare time now, though. I need to do a new hobby. I need to find something to do that's fun. I go around and I'm looking for things to do. Like, I'm, looking at, model kits and toys and Legos and whatever. And I'm thinking, I need to find a hobby. But the thing that keeps invading my mind is, how do I monetize this hobby? Like, how do I turn this hobby into a paycheck? Because for millennials, like, we don't get to have hobbies. We don't get to have lives that aren't monetized. Everything's about the hustle. And so, like, iHunt is kind of a documentary. Like, it's very autobiographical in that regard.
I know, and I had mentioned it. I don't know if I mentioned it on the recording or not, or through before we got started, but I got caught in one of those I don't know if it's an ad or a promotion that you had done, or just stumbled across, somebody had retweeted it, and I came across the concept of what it was, and hey, this you and it's like almost like an ad for the app, I think, and I was just blown away by it, and it got my attention instantly. Of, this sounds really neat. Like, I feel for that struggle of the person who has to go out there to do what they're doing, to put themselves on the line just to make money for rent or for food or for bills.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've gotten a lot of great feedback about this. Like, this is a huge thing for me. God, so those ads, the ones that you're talking about, they were inspired by a Fiverr ad that I saw way long ago, back whenever I first started writing iHunt. And the ad text reads, "You eat a coffee for lunch. You follow through on your follow through. Sleep deprivation is your drug of choice. You might be a doer." And I saw this ad, and I'm like, is this like a post-apocalyptic joke? Like, what the fuck is wrong with these people? Like, they're not even pretending to not exploit workers at this point. They're just aggressively saying, no, you will grind yourself into dust for $5. And like, it blew my mind. So I started doing these iHunt ads, and I realized I can't go as dark as these ads, so I have to go funnier. Like, I have to approach it from a sarcastic, tongue-in-cheek standpoint, because I will get depressed otherwise. Like, oh.
Now with iHunt, you have the novel,
Mhm.
and I believe that you have, is it like short stories or like another novella?
So there's actually a whole series of them now, and it's kind of grown beyond what it was. So the first novel, Blood Flow, is technically not an iHunt novel, but it's in the same world, and it features a lot of the same people. Then there's the first novel, iHunt: Killing Monsters in the Gig Economy. That's like the introduction to Lana. I wrote a little prequel novella called iHunt: A Transylvanian Prince in Southern California, which is about a vampire, an ancient vampire who comes to buy some beachfront property, basically. Um, then I wrote one called iHunt: Mayhem in Movie Land, which is a weird take on my time working at Disneyland. Um, then there's a full-length novel called iHunt: The Chosen One, which is sort of my taking the piss out of the sort of the Chosen One trope, the Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and comparing that to the way that the working class don't get to be chosen. They have to choose to work themselves. They don't get to turn down the call to adventure. Um, and then my partner wrote a book called Reaching Out that is setting in the same world, but it's about ghosts, and spiritualism in the world. And I'm currently writing a short story collection for iHunt, that'll probably be out by the time this podcast is out. And it is called iHunt: A 4G or a Fivesome. And it is a series of shorts, that collect some of the older stuff. Um, Oh, I also have a book called I Hunt Frankenstein, kind of, but not really. And it is about Lana hunting a rogue AI and dealing with being a disaster bisexual. And then there's one called I Hunt the Dark Knight, or sorry, I Hunt a Dark Knight, but not the Dark Knight. And
Hmm.
it is an erotica story, that I wrote as a challenge for last Halloween. So there's a whole series of books now. Oh, there's also Ultra, which is a book about psychics set in that world, with a lot of the same characters too. It's based on the MK Ultra trials and Area 51. A lot of weird shit. So there's a whole bunch of books actually now.
That is awesome, because I've been on Amazon just browsing, and had noticed that there's a few of them, but
Mhm.
and I know, because I knew about the Dark Knight one, because I thought that was hilarious. When I saw that posted, I was like, I laughed at the joke, and I didn't see that one on there, and I knew that like it existed, so I'm going to have to make sure I start tracking them down. Now you are turning iHunt into a tabletop role playing game.
Yeah, we actually the digital version, the PDF version, we released that in December, right around Christmas, right before the end of the year, and we're currently working on the physical, the print version, but that's a little complicated because of the COVID-19 thing. Um,
Hmm.
it turns out printers are having a lot of trouble getting books made and sent back and forth and stuff. So that's taking its time, but it'll probably actually be done by the time that this podcast comes out because we're almost finished, with all of that. But yeah, it's a big deal actually. Like not like in the sense that like Dungeons and Dragons is a big deal or anything, but as far as indie games go, we've seen way more success than we ever dreamed imaginable. We're getting a ton of attention from a lot of unexpected places, and it's been really great. We've gotten such a great response to it.
What, as far as like how is gameplay, as far as, is it your traditional D20 style? Is it something like a storyteller White Wolf? Like what's your mechanics for it? Just out of curiosity.
So for anyone who is familiar, it is running off of a modified version of Fate. by Evil Hat, which, if you're not familiar with Fate is a very story-heavy system where all of the character traits are like epithets. We call them aspects, and they're sort of double-edged descriptions of characters. So, for example, if you are playing a Fate game of Leverage, the main character of Leverage, Nate, he would have high functioning alcoholic, which is, of course, double edged because on one hand, he's an alcoholic, but on the other hand, he is high functioning. And so all of these traits on these characters, like you have like 4 to 6 of them, and they're all double edged, and you sort of play on them. You can compel them, which basically puts people in a rock and a hard place situation, or you can invoke them, which gives you an advantage based on them. And so it's a fun way to sort of take the narrative strength of a character and instill it into the arc of the story, the game mechanics. The mechanics themselves use what we call fate dice or fudge dice, which are 6-sided dice that have 2 pluses, 2 minuses, and 2 blanks. You roll 4 of them, and you're going to get a result from -4 to +4. So on average, you'll get a 0. And what this does is it basically expresses what your character is good at. You will usually expect no difference. Like you will expect certain results, but then there's a little bit of swing in either direction. I like that because I like whenever the protagonists of a story, we basically know how they are going to succeed. We basically know how it's going to work, but sometimes unexpected things can push that.
Mm-hmm. How is it going to work as far as like a group game goes? Because something like when I was thinking about it just before we started talking, it feels like it could be a very much a one-on-one type game, but I know that it's geared towards a group.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You can do it one-on-one, and we've played it one-on-one. It's like that's a style of play that's very near and dear to my heart. But really, the premise of iHunt is sort of any port in a storm. It is very found family. So you have this sort of ragtag group of iHunters who need each other to survive. If one person goes out and does the iHunt thing, they go out hunting monsters for cash, any single problem will end up in their death. So typically, iHunters work in small groups. That way, if one of them screws up, the others can sort of pick up that slack. And also, that way, you can have a little bit of expertise. So you can have a character who is, a master of the occultic sciences and can do montages at the library looking up ancient spells. Whereas you have other characters who are, masters of technology or who are just really, really badass and good at punching werewolves. So it's all about the give or take and the ability to work with other specialties in order to sort of maximize that group dynamic. It's found family.
That's awesome. I just had the vision of like a leverage group just going out there, but instead of fighting the big corporate people, it's just fighting the vampire.
Absolutely, and leverage was a huge influence. Like I said earlier, the voice in iHunt was heavily influenced by my work on leverage, and the dynamic of the group is very, very inspired by the way that leverage panned out. So like that when you say that, it clicks perfectly with exactly the way that iHunt is supposed to be.
That's awesome. Now, so the digital version's out. The actual print version is coming at some point, hopefully this year, maybe by the time this podcast episode is released, if not, hopefully a little bit after.
Yeah.
What is the future? What is beyond the game and then the short story collection?
Okay, so I'm working on some things that I can't talk about yet, but that are super exciting. Oh my God, exciting, huge things. And I'm like so anxious to talk about them, but I can't. The big thing with iHunt right now, like I'm doing the short story collection as far as the fiction side goes. As far as the game goes, we are doing an interesting model of expanding upon that. We have a Patreon, but instead of just doing like random stuff with the Patreon is more like a subscription service. And every month we put out a little book. We call them zines. And each of these little zine books is a fully published, full high production quality booklet that's like 24 to 28 pages roughly, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. And each of them tackles a very specific target, like a very specific topic. We did one on road trips in iHunt. We did one on motherhood in iHunt. We did one on we did one on people who come back from the dead to finish their stories, like kind of like The Crow. There's a lot of weird stuff there, and we've done 7 of them so far. We're currently, as of this podcast, we're working on the 8th one, which is our Fun in the Sun beach episode, and it's all about like merfolk and creatures from the Black Lagoon, and ocean zombies and weird stuff like that. So each one of these is a quirky new idea that we get to experiment with, and then every roughly 6 or 7 of these books we're going to compile into one bigger book that we can print as the sort of season 1 compilation. And that's how we're expanding the main game.
That is a really wonderful idea, and I love it. That is something that I don't know if I've ever seen it from anyone else before, but that is really awesome. I'm psyched for that.
Thank you. Oh, well, we're actually working on the next game too. We're super early on it, but we're going to be doing a game set in the same world, fully compatible rules wise, and it's based on the vampires of the world. It's tentatively called The Savage Garden, or Living Forever in the Gig Economy. And it's The Savage Garden is a reference not to a band from the 90s. It's a reference to Anne Rice from The Vampire Lestat. That's how he described being a vampire, was the Savage Garden. But we're taking that to a sort of different level, and our vampire game is not like other vampire games and stories because it is a game about millennial vampires. It is a game about looking at essentially the end of the potential world, when you could live forever, but maybe the world won't. We're staring down a climate catastrophe, and nobody's fucking doing anything about it. So the vampires in the Savage Garden don't perceive themselves as predators; they perceive themselves as gardeners. They are fostering a better world.
That's an interesting take on vampires, or on like that whole vampire genre, because that is something I've not really ever heard of, and it's got a great, like, especially nowadays with everything that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
It could definitely, like, that just hits so close on so many different levels.
Absolutely, and that's our goal. Like, we're trying for that. Like, I keep thinking about this. Like, I was heavily inspired by the last few years in politics, and I keep seeing like Bernie Sanders. He keeps being like, okay, we need this Green New Deal, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, we need this Green New Deal. We need to stop the climate crisis because climate scientists say we have about a decade, and if we don't take immediate, heavy, revolutionary action to save the climate, the world is essentially doomed. We are going to raise the global temperatures by 2 degrees, and this is going to melt the polar sea ice. And like, why aren't we acting? And I think that a lot of that is that we have a lot of very old people in power who aren't going to see 50 years more. So they have no incentive. But what if you're a vampire? What if you could live 500 years, but the world's only going to live 30? Well, you better fucking do something about it, right?
Exactly. And speaking as someone that lives in Florida, I can tell you that there is just some people, and I try not to get political, but there are some people that just will never be on the side that you need them to be on, regardless of if they end up in the hospital or not,
or under the water because they're in Florida. Oh my god. Oh wow. Yeah.
absolutely.
So,
And I do want to, I want to say for the record, I try not to do politics on the podcast, but if you go on my Twitter page, there's absolutely political stuff, and if you don't know where I lean, I definitely lean on the left side of things, and more not than lean. I'm pretty much like falling over on the left side. So
absolutely.
now, for people that have listened to this episode, Olivia, and they want to find you, they want to find iHunt, they want to find whatever works that you are putting out, what are the best places to do so?
Okay, so the best places. Okay, so if you want access to me, like if you want to follow me, the best place is my Twitter account, which is Machine IV, like machine and then the Roman numeral 4. That's me. I am extremely opinionated, extremely political. I am the first role playing game book that I ever did was a game called Machine Zeit, and it's a space horror game. And the first review that we got accused the book of being written by the ghost of Howard Zinn. So we wear our politics on our shoulders, or on our sleeves, and so if that's not a thing that you can tolerate, do not follow me on Twitter. I'm very loud, but our games, you can follow us at Machine Age Inc. Just Machine Age Inc. on Twitter. Also, we have our website is machineage.tokyo. That's a good place to go. And all of our stuff is available on DriveThruRPG and itch.io. So that's probably the best way to go about it. We are technically active on Facebook, but we don't use that as much. So Twitter is really the best bet.
Awesome. Well, I will make sure to have the links to you and Machine Age in the show notes and on the Facebook page and website. So that way, if you are listening and you enjoyed what you heard either about Olivia or about iHunt or the other works that they have put out, you can definitely click on the links and check them out. I do know that Itch gives more money to its creators than DriveThru. So if you can, take a purchase through the Itch, because I did have to specify that with a few other people, because I want to make sure that my money when I spend it goes more to the creator than to
absolutely
the site that's hosting it. So do what you can. Oh, go ahead.
The other thing that I was going to mention, I forgot, our Patreon. Our Patreon is at Machine Age, but there's a reason why I wanted to bring that up, because it is actually relevant to your previous episode. We are I'm not used to talking about URLs. It's Machine Age, patreon.com/Machine Age. And because of the Patreon, we've been pretty successful with the Patreon. We actually brought on Francita Soto, who you spoke to recently.
Yes.
She's been working on our graphic design. I sort of like set the stage. I did all of the graphic design for the iHunt RPG. I did all of the art for it and everything. And now she is working with me because of our Patreon. And so if you enjoyed the episode with Francita, you can enjoy her work with us now at Machine Age.
And that is awesome. I remember, we're recording this now in July. This episode's coming out in September, but I remember seeing the announcement. And I was just over the moon, because talking with Francita about her love of iHunt and talking with you and just getting involved. And I'm super excited for all involved. It made me so happy.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to be working with her. She's so good. She's such a great person, and I'm very I'm a big control freak about these things. I have a hard time sort of handing my creative babies over to other people, because then I have to pick it apart. I'm like, oh, this isn't exactly what I would do, and so that's a big deal. But Francita is really talented. She's been able to express these things in a way that I've never seen before. I'm super impressed with her, and sometimes I'm jealous. Her graphic design is so goddamn good. The way that she puts things together, it's just super pretty, and I wish that I'm super proud to work with her.
That's awesome. So if you want to get in on all those cool things that you do on the Patreon, definitely click on that Patreon link, so that way you can have all the editions ahead of whenever they get collated and collected for the print version. So that's super awesome too. So I'll have all the links on the show notes and on the Facebook page and website. So if you want, you can go and click on them and check out Olivia and her work. Awesome. And Olivia, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule for coming on and talking with me, because I have had a tremendous joy and excitement in getting to talk about not only iHunt and the tabletop role-playing stuff, but also getting really interested in going to check out Gundam probably tomorrow or the next day.
Awesome. I can't wait to hear about it. So I expect some comments. So yeah, thank you so much. It was really a great time.
Thank you for listening to Tales from the Fandom. Subscribe to us on iTunes or your podcast app of choice. Follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/talesfromthefandom to see photos, links, leave feedback, and check out upcoming guests. If you'd like to be a guest, email David at talesfromthefandom@gmail.com.